Something I noticed over the weekend, of course, it got buried on a weekend. It was a Sunday, as I recall, and nobody's talking about it. It never made its way to television news at all, which, frankly, kind of surprised me. I expected at least, there would be some coverage of this, but no. The article is in the New York Times. It was on the last day of the year, December 31st. It was titled Nixon's Vietnam Treachery. And you'll notice that those of you who have been longtime viewers or listeners to this program know that I have been saying, and I have been saying, quite literally since we started this program. I've been saying for 14 years or longer, and I've been writing probably more like 20 years, that the last legitimately elected Republican president of the United States was Dwight Eisenhower in 1952, and arguably reelected in 54. That was it, or 56 rather. That was it. And people say, well, what are you talking about? We've had a bunch of Republican presidents. Well, let's look at it. Ronald Reagan, as President Bonnie Sauter, and again, you want to read the article yourself. You can find it, with the Google machine or the DuckDuckGo machine, your choice. Former Iranian President Bonnie Sauter, BANI-SADR. Plug his name in and plug in the word Argo, A-R-G-O, because it's actually a critique of the movie Argo. And there's a Christian Science article in which the president of Iran comes right out and says, in August of 1980, we cut a deal with the Reagan administration. We were accepting, tires via Israel for, spare parts for our military. And in exchange for that, we were going to hold the hostages until the election. And we let go of the hostages literally at the moment Reagan put his hand on the Bible. And in exchange for that, Reagan was going to continue to sell us weapons. And that became known as Iran-Contra. So Ronald Reagan committed treason to become president. Had those hostages been released 6 months earlier or earlier than that, which, by the way, Bonnie Sauter got elected in August on the platform of releasing the hostages. He wanted to release the hostages. More than 90% of the Iranian people wanted to release the hostages, but the Ayatollahs had cut a deal with the Reagan administration or with the Reagan campaign. So Reagan was not a legitimate president. Of course, that leads you to George W. Bush, not legitimate by virtue of being Reagan's vice president. Which then takes us to George W. Bush. I just laid out how his brother stole 90,000 African-American votes, took 90,000 African-Americans, knocked them off the voting rolls. BBC, everybody in the world knows about this. Greg Palast reported on this for the BBC. It went worldwide. It was not picked up by any American news media in any consequential way. But everybody else in the world knew that the brother of the guy running for president threw 90,000 African Americans off their voting rolls so that he could get close enough to have, close enough to the election, close enough to stealing the election that the Supreme Court could step in and give it to him. So George W. Bush was not a legitimate president. And now you've got Donald Trump. And the long list of illegitimacies associated with the Trump presidency, I think, is substantial, and I don't need to go through it again. But the one name that I haven't mentioned since Eisenhower was Richard Nixon. And I've been going off on Nixon forever. And here it is in the New York Times on Sunday, December 31st. You'll notice nobody talked about this in the news. Or maybe they did and I didn't notice it. I mean, maybe this happened. This was 2 days after my surgery, so I wasn't, just laying around watching TV with a clear brain. I was pretty loaded up on painkillers, but still, I'm paying attention to the news here for you, and for me. Richard Nixon always denied it, John Farrell writes. David Frost, a historian, Lyndon Johnson, who had the strongest suspicion and the most cause for outrage at his successor's rumored treachery. To them all, Nixon insisted he had not sabotaged Johnson's 1968 peace initiative to bring the war in Vietnam to an early conclusion. My God, I would never do anything to encourage South Vietnam not to come to the table, Nixon told Johnson. Now we know Nixon lied. I'm quoting from the New York Times. Now we know Nixon lied. A newfound cache of notes left by H.R. Haldeman, his closest aide, shows that Nixon directed his campaign efforts to scuttle the peace talks, which he feared would give his opponent, Hubert Humphrey, an edge in the election. On October 22nd, 1968, he ordered Haldeman to, quote, monkey wrench the initiative, end quote. And here's the conversation, and I've played this for you over and over and over again since the Lyndon Johnson Library released it about 5 or 6 years ago. And again, the media has been completely ignoring this. Here's the conversation that President Lyndon Johnson had with Senate Majority Leader Everett Dirksen, a Republican. They respected each other greatly, these two men, but they were on opposite sides of the aisle about Richard Nixon's treason, how the CIA is telling LBJ, we know that Nixon, through back channels, is going through Anna Chennault. He's going to them, and he's saying, just hold off, we'll give you a better deal. And he says, I don't want to get this in the election, Everett. He doesn't want the American people to think that, that Richard Nixon would be that terrible a crook, right? He doesn't want the American people to know. Lyndon Johnson believed in ethics or something. I don't know, whatever. But here it is. Here it is. Check it out.
Here's the latest information we got. The agent says that they just talked to the boss in New Mexico. And that he says that you must hold out. Just hold on until after the election. We know what Chew is saying to them out there. Yeah. We're pretty well informed on both ends. Now, I'm reading their hand, Everett. I don't want to get this in the campaign. That's right. And they oughtn't to be doing this. This is treason. I know.
This is treason. I know. And that's how Richard Nixon became president. And how did Donald Trump become president? He ran as a Democrat. He said, I'm opposed to these trade deals. Well, Democrats have opposed every single one of the trade deals. Yeah, I get it. Bill Clinton signed one of them. It was actually negotiated by George Herbert Walker Bush. But the vast majority of Democrats in both the House and the Senate and among the American population have always opposed all of these trade deals. The Trump ran as a Democrat there. The Democratic Party's arguably major accomplishments, Social Security and Medicare, and secondarily or tertiarily Medicaid. Donald Trump ran on the platform of, I'm going to preserve these programs. I'm not going to let Republicans cut them. I played 2 weeks ago for you a montage. We've got 5 or 6 clips here of Donald Trump saying this on the campaign trail. He ran as a Democrat. Now, he ran as a bigoted Democrat. He ran as a George Wallace Democrat, so he brought along the South. But he ran as a Democrat, and we'll see where this goes. But this has got to be a crisis time for the Republican Party because, frankly, they have never been able since Dwight Eisenhower, who, by the way, 2 months before he announced he was running for president, everybody assumed Dwight Eisenhower was a Democrat. He probably was. Harry Truman at that point was quite unpopular because of the war in South Korea. And so, if Eisenhower wanted to become president, he had to run as a Republican. And he did, and he won. But since Eisenhower, there has not been a single legitimate Republican president. Anyhow, my apologies to you. The board is still full. We'll pick up your calls after this. We got a couple of guests here coming in, too. Stick around.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.